Prasanna, we have been recording for now over 2 years. Yes, over 2 years, about 130 episodes down. And consistently, except if we have announced in the advance that we are not going to schedule or air an episode for that coming week, we have not done so otherwise. There was one exception, however, last week we did not post a video, and there is a certain reason for that. Let me sort of be open about it with our audience as well. And the reason is sometimes the creative flow, the creative juices stop flowing, and there is a sort of a mental block that you kind of experience. And then whatever you're saying becomes sort of repetitive. Now, as a creative person, I experience this on and off happening. Of course, to overcome that, there is consistency that one has to maintain. So if I'm, let's say, practicing sketching and I'm not able to creatively think of new ideas, what to sketch or something, the consistency is the key here, or even for that matter, journaling, that I have to keep doing it. In this case, when you have to put things out, is consistency the key? Is the question, because can then an unfinished product go out? Not that all of our episodes are highly polished and finished, they're absolutely not. But still, sometimes when you know that you are maintaining a certain standard and below that, should I go out? So these are the questions which are coming in my mind, concerns as well about how we proceed with the show. We don't know how long these ideas will flow, will they be meaningful. Our conversations, of course, between the two of us continue happening week on week basis, but to put it out for the public, does that make sense? I need to know that as well. And what is your point of view?
Yeah,
And before I hand over, I would also like to just sort of clarify to our audience is that we just briefly discussed this, and before jumping into the conversation, we said, okay, let's just record this conversation and hope it makes to the final cut as well. And so therefore, I'm also going to hear Prasanna's points of views, or he's going to hear my points of views for the first time. Yeah. With that, you can start.
yeah, absolutely, Shandesh. So I think I would like to look at this particular situation in two ways. One is a generic question for creators, and when it comes to burnout, deal with that. So that is one aspect, and then I will touch upon specifically for 13 with this podcast. What is my view? So for the first part, I think that as the saying goes, that make your hay when it is sunny or something like that. I honestly believe that when we are one person, when a person, individual or a group is in a flow, in a state of creation, in a state of producing some content which is relevant, which the time one should make the most of it. So if I am in a phase of writing, rather than me looking at, I write once in a week, like say for a blog or a newsletter. But if I am in a flow state, I should write whatever number of newsletters I want. I may not publish those. I can keep those, but publish it only weekly. But I should write and keep. So that is one, I think, way of looking at it. And I have seen that happening myself, that we as human beings are into different phases, different situations, different constraints. And in today's world, because of the digital technology, of course, it gives us a lot of freedom to work whenever we want. But it can also create botheration and blockage whenever it wants. So even if you think that you have taken it as leave and you are gone for a retreat or for some personal creative space, that doesn't guarantee, because of the digital technology, something can still creep in and you might have to get distracted from your activity. So my point is, whenever it is working well, you should make the most of it. Whether it is with this recording things also, one can do 10 hours of recording in a week or 20 hours of recording in a week and then keep it, then we use it later. So that's the view about creation in today's world. When it comes to the specific question for 13, I think here it is a little different. I personally think that meeting week on week helps us in sharing about us, the new things which we have learned. So rather than say you and I sit in a room, I come to Bangalore or you come to Mumbai, and we both sit in a room and do a recording of 52 hours. Even not 52 hours is required. 20 hours of recording is enough for us to cut and then keep putting these videos every week. We can use 4 5
for
t-shirts, just
for a
keep
year.
changing those t-shirts, do the record. Yes, and we can then post for a year. But that's not the idea here. The idea is to come together, share, and think on those things, because I think there is no particular constraint as such in terms of a commitment to what we deliver. And that's the advantage of this. Because there is no constraint, we can openly share, bring new ideas, toss those ideas and see. Not every time we will see a concrete conclusion out of it. Sometimes it is just abstract, just thought process and thought experiments. But some other times we get something concrete which you and I both keep applying in our lives. And I'm sure some of our listeners might also be find it useful.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I get what you're saying. And even in case of 13, we have done this in the past whenever there have been, we are in a flow state, we have recorded up to 3 episodes once, I think even 4 episodes in a go. Beyond that, it also becomes tiring to sort of do all this process, set up online system. And one is the conversation, which we have to try and keep natural. Then while we are naturally conversing, also I have to keep an eye that, okay, things are recording properly. There was not just an issue with the flow that we are talking of, but also flow of the internet a couple of minutes ago, and the video was stuttering. Now I don't know whether it will come in the recording or whether it was only my internet which was stuttering, and the recording should be fine. I'm not sure, but and that's bothering me in the back of the mind. So these are the things which, when you're dealing with, also it curbs and hinders the flow state, which is so essentially practical aspect uh, of delivering is affecting the creative aspect for a creator. And this happens in almost all the professions, be it in my realm, where as a designer, when we are trying to get a project out, in the concept stage, it's all your dream, your imagination being visualized and then put it out for others to visualize. And then there are practical constraints which come, which could be time, it could be budget, it could be technology available, it could be the kind of labor, the skill that is available, and many more forces which are then acting upon it. And then you try and navigate through that. The difference here is in some professions, in some realms, there's a clear distinction that this is the creator space, this is the editing space. And in while that is so the case in almost all the creative realms, the window is quite small. Like for example, we record and then immediately get into editing mode, and then there is no scope for going back and correcting. Like let's say in my profession as a designer, that okay, I go back to the drawing board, revisit that, keep the essence of it, and tweak it a little bit so that it still makes the same meaning while we are not having the same ability to deliver it. But here, when we are editing the video, we don't have the ability to go back and re-record those things. One is our logistical constraints, that we have scheduled a certain time and space when we sit and record. The other is uh, simply practically then taking that sort of seamlessness, or the natural flow of conversation will not never be maintained. Then the entire conversation becomes scripted. So it is not in the ethos of this particular creative discipline. And therefore, it becomes even more challenging to kind of, bridge between these aspects. So there are these sort of constraints which are also there. So how does one deal with that? One thing which comes to my mind is, apart from what you mentioned earlier, is also preparedness. That you should be not only prepared for the content and what you want to deliver, but also be prepared for the outcome that is not in line with uh, what is vision, and be okay with it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think preparedness is a part which we don't take into consideration, but it is extremely important, and it is also connected with the other P, which is the purpose. So I think if a purpose of whatever we are doing as a creative
Mm.
venture is clear, then along with that purpose comes the other P, which is preparedness, where you can keep some, you can say prompts, as we say, required. to support your thought process, and that those prompts will help you in then building on the story which you want to build. So in whatever field it is, I think that preparedness can help a lot.
Mm. So these two P's are quite important. That keeping purpose as a north star keeps you aligned into the direction that you're moving, knows exactly which direction you're going. If you're swaying away from that direction, it still keeps you aligned and helps you recalibrate. And preparedness, like pre-preparedness to the content, that you prepare for your content and you start jotting down the notes and making key aspects. So uh, it allows you to, and in whatever domain that we intend to, like in our case, the preparedness is having a bunch of random conversations and then selectively pick up 2 or 3 topics that come out and jot them down. But then beyond that, again, not talk about it too much, but internally have a dialogue with ourselves and then bring it out so that there is a natural flow when we are talking about the conversation. Your points of views are also for the first time for me, and vice versa. But then there is another aspect, which is sort of what we are providing through this. Because one is, there is, in this randomness, sometimes you have to fish out the meaning. And the onus then becomes on the listener who have not signed up for fishing out of the job. So it is in that context, we have to also be clear of what we are providing, or rather not providing.
No, I honestly, Shantish, think this question of providing value or providing
Not necessarily value.
takeaways. Ah,
Yeah, but not
yeah. So,
necessarily value.
but my point is whether it is value, takeaway, or meaning, or getting something like fishing, as you said, from what is happening. I think that's a good thought process, and that's typically what typically area of the content designers would start with. But I think in our case, honestly and very openly, when we are speaking, I think the one thing which is coming in our way is that when we talk about being natural, uh, the effort to be natural
Mm.
is something which is in our
Unnatural.
way, is what I think. Because honestly, yeah, that is making it unnecessary. I'll tell you what happens. If for the entire 2 years, if we take out the uh, uh, recordings which we have not put
Mm.
in the final publishing, the things which you and I discussed before the recording starts and after the recording starts,
Yep.
trust me, those are equally or sometimes more interesting
Yeah, that's true.
in many cases.
But I also feel there is another constraint to that. Of course, is the medium of expression. Language is a medium to express, because we have decided to keep our content in English. We are forced to speak in English,
That's
but our
true.
normal conversation, our sort of flow, is essentially in Marathi, and then a mix of English and Hindi coming in between, but mostly predominantly Marathi. And therefore, that natural expression, like on several instances, we've said that our accents change when we are speaking together in English, because there's a tinge of that Marathi accent which sort of trickles in and flows in. Not that my accent is very different from how I speak here, but regardless, I could sense that, certain lingo which I'm picking is something which I'll use only in conversation with you and not otherwise. So it is still there,
Yeah,
uh, but the free flowingness of conversing with you in Marathi is very different than uh, uh, still
yeah, I
trying
get that. Yeah,
up. So this itself is
yeah,
also in a way unnatural then.
true. I agree with you. So that can be one of the barriers for sure. But then, other than that, also, I think the things which we discuss are not necessarily again giving any outcome or a value every time, but those are more of conversations and more natural conversations. So just a thought to make this conversation more maybe natural, and then we'll take out that burden of being creative every time. So
Mm.
it is like when you call me, I call you. We always speak for whatever time. Like before this call, we were discussing about the climate or weather conditions in Hyderabad or in Mumbai. So even in that, we find something interesting. I was sharing about my ninth standard story of my first trip to Hyderabad and my last trip rather. Yeah, because that was the only time I had been to that city as a school trip. So then, if you see, this story can be more interesting
Mm.
than the things which we discussed. So the whole point is that we have to keep looking at it, and that will come. It is taking time, but I'm sure there will be a time when we will be absolutely okay to just hit the record button and then speak, and it will still be fun.
Yeah, and these stories are, I think, anchor points which allow us to kind of go back, revisit those. You did not even thought of it, perhaps not in the last 1 week or even in the last entire year about that trip. And suddenly I talked
Not
about,
just because you were in Hyderabad, I spoke about it. Otherwise, I
yes,
not thought about it even 30 seconds before.
yeah, but then you recollected your accommodation, the kind of it was in the dormitory with other
Yeah,
kids, with limited resources and the hot weather, and then all that experience allows you to kind of anchor yourself back in those days, back in that experience. And the reference point is today the lifestyle that you are living. So, with respect to that, you feel that, oh, that was so painful, probably. In your expression, I could gauge, but I'm, I bet that you can, uh, if as a ninth standard kid, when you were there, you were enjoying thoroughly that trip, despite all the sort of uh, hassles
absolutely,
that you had to deal with.
absolutely
So it allows us
true,
to
very
sort
true.
of revisit. A lot of times these conversations are then pondering in my head after the recording while I'm editing also, I'm listening back to that conversation. Oh, okay, I meant that. And it's not coming across like that. And it's coming across as something else. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you feel that, oh, okay, this is not what I wanted to say. Can I cut it? It tempts me also to sort of cut out the conversation sometimes. No, no, no. Unless there is a glitch, you don't really cut. That's against what we have started for. So I think most of the times we've kind of kept it that way. Even if the facts are wrongly put, either we sort of correct it in the subsequent episode or in the description, or if somebody points it out, then put it as a note on social media to rectify ourselves. We've done that in the past and uh, still decided not to cut it from the uh, cut if we've decided to put that conversation on the media. So then is that creation? Because then we are just putting out our random conversations. And if this conversation can be then deemed as creation, then any and every conversation that two friends are having or two people are having, can that then be termed as creative conversation? One thing that comes to my mind as
So
I ask this
firstly, I don't
question is there are two ways to look at any conversation or including the conversation that goes in your own head that you are having with yourself. Is that we are either having a creative conversation or a descriptive conversation. We are
yeah.
either
See,
describing from the
I
past or creating something that does
yeah,
not.
that's true. That's true. I was also about to come to that point, Santish. So I think when you say whether it is creative, my question would be why not? And for any two friends for that matter, not only between us, but any two friends speaking. So why not would be the first thing which will come to my mind. But then to make it, as you said, from descriptive to creative, more creative, or rather bringing the craft into that is where the art of storytelling comes into picture or art of conversations come into picture, which we are still working on, to be very honest. We are both not claiming to be experts in that field. So
Yes.
we have to keep working on, because I'll tell you the story of Hyderabad, that also reminds me of incidents that in whatever pocket money I was given, it was difficult for me to manage to get a cold drink, or there were grapes in Hyderabad that time, or there were watermelons, which would tempt me because of the hot summer and heat and humidity. It was calling to go and have something to eat or the cold thing to have. But in spite of that, trying to save a little money, I remember buying in front of Charminar. There was, at least at that time, a market, like a Meena Bazaar kind of a market where jewelry shops kind of things were there. And from there, very small, as I was in ninth standard, I think it was for 10 rupees or 20 rupees, whatever. I had taken a sari, the
Oh,
thing which you can put here on a sari, and I had taken it for my mother.
mm.
And she used to use it for many years after that. It was very nice. It was like a bush kind of a thing made of golden polishing and some 20 rupees thing. Now, that also I can see now that how I managed to get that and protected it from all the students' bags, throwing everything was happening, but I made sure that I brought it and gave it to my mother. So I think these kind of things, further add to the whole story and the experience. So I think the point is that how to narrate this same incident, what takeaways I have, and how it can shift the emotions and the feelings of that story also matters, and it's a part of the craft of storytelling.
And as you speak that, what occurs to me, what's the biggest takeaway for me from this conversation is that despite knowing that the power of storytelling for so many years now, that I realize in this conversation that the bridge between descriptive conversation and creative conversation is storytelling. The moment you start describing something as a painful thing that you've gone through, or just describing to vent it out or just to express how good it was, becomes self-centered. And the moment you put it in the form of a story, one is it allows you to detach yourself from the character in the story, and you narrate your own experience as a character, as a third person. And the second thing is in that then you are able to see that entire event from a distance. Now sometimes time gives that perspective, but just deliberating that distance allows you to create a conversation which is, while it is descriptive, becomes a story. And in that story, it starts spiraling into another sort of an area, and it suddenly transforms into creative conversation. That's absolutely as a bridge between descriptive and creative conversation is something which
and for the listener, if you see, it connects with their particular emotion with that story.
Yes.
Like when I said about what I got for my mother, that for a listener, or it might connect with their sister, brother, whatever they have done for their parents, grandparents, whatever it is, but they will then connect to their childhood memory of they doing some small gesture for their people in their life. So that's the another side effect, I would say, of a storytelling.
Not side effect is a negative connotation, I think, in our day-to-day language. So maybe not side effect, but that a story leads into another story most of the time.
Right.
And then you, like Mungeri Lal, you start going into your dream, then you start imagining and seeing your story. But it's important that art, that craft of storytelling is so important because it allows you to distance yourself, but also then bring an expression to your experiences and give those experiences and allow a third person who is listening to experience that world. You bring them into your world. I think that is very powerful.
Absolutely.
At that note, I think we can complete our conversation. Thank you so much for listening.